Today, our focus is on the truly staggering scale and the structural risks that are implied by these new details circulating about Avengers Doomsday. We're looking at a reported runtime of 3 hours and 45 minutes, and the stated goal of integrating, and I'm quoting here, all of Marvel's history together. So the real question, the fundamental question for the filmmakers is this. Is this massive scope, this incredible length, is it an essential structural piece for delivering that huge narrative payoff? Or does it just create this unmanageable density that risks breaking everything apart and diluting the core conflict? I'm going to argue that the length and scope are structurally necessary to do this right.
And I'm going to be arguing the opposite, that the ambition to cram in the sheer volume of stuff required for that kind of historical integration, it just risks a catastrophic narrative overload. I mean, sure, the runtime gives you the capacity, but the complexity you're introducing, I think, inevitably undermines the film's cohesion. They're confusing a very large canvas with a successfully detailed painting.
See, that line of reasoning, it worries me because I think it fundamentally misunderstands the scale of what they're trying to do. When you commit to integrating all of Marvel's history, and we hear these reports that the big multiversal meeting scene from, the last big crossover is going to be replicated at a ×50 scale, well, a standard length film just becomes mathematically impossible. That extended runtime, we're talking nearly 45 minutes longer than Avengers Endgame, that's not padding. It's crucial structural scaffolding. And we need that time specifically to give the right dramatic weight to the main antagonist, Dr. Doom. If Doom is truly the centerpiece, the villain that culminates the entire saga, we have to understand the complexity of his backstory. I mean, you need time for his parents, his mother's deal with Mephisto, his connections to a Sue Storm variant, and of course his relationship with a variant of Reed Richards. That depth is the foundation, and you just can't rush it.
And I see it completely differently. My central worry is that this compulsion to explain every single piece of Doom's comic backstory, Mephisto, the parental issues, the Sue Storm thing, it just risks this monumental sprawl. You're basically asking for a full origin story, which, that usually gets its own movie, to be shoehorned into what's supposed to be the apocalyptic finale of a saga decades in the making. Poor pacing is the inevitable result when the main Doomsday conflict has to keep hitting pause for a history lesson. And what's more, this commitment to dozens of characters and these ×50 scale fights, it just sounds like a recipe for spectacle over substance. Characters will pop up just to check a box for the fans, not because they're actually integral to the plot. And we've seen this fail before. The very quick disposal of the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness, which included Captain Carter, that shows just how easily good structure is sacrificed for cheap shock value. If Captain Carter is really as central as they say, the film's huge scope just dramatically increases the risk that she gets underserved all over again.
Okay, let's focus on Dr. Doom for a second, because I think his depth really determines whether the runtime is justified or not. You suggest his history belongs in a different film. I am arguing that 3 hours and 45 minutes is the only way to properly service his importance in this film. If the goal isn't just a strong villain, but the historical villain who culminates everything that came before, then the audience has to be invested in his motives beyond just, simple megalomania. That time investment makes sure the audience understands why Doom sees himself as a savior, why his very personal, almost romantic relationships with variants of Reed and Sue are what inform his entire multiversal campaign. If we skimp on that foundational lore, Doom just becomes another generic threat that you could have beaten in 2 hours. We need narrative depth over anonymous spectacle, and that depth demands time.
That's a compelling case for Doom's character, I'll give you that. But have you really thought through the structural problems of integrating that history? By focusing so heavily on this external, past lower Mephisto, the parents, the variant love interests, you are fundamentally distracting from the immediate emotional stakes for our current heroes. We already know the film has to market this big rivalry between Captain America and Dr. Doom. So if we spend an extra 45 minutes just detailing Doom's tragic past, we are stealing crucial time away from developing the emotional core of the heroes we already know and their response to this threat. The film, it risks becoming a prequel for the villain that's embedded inside the finale for the heroes. Why does Doom's threat have to be established through a detailed accounting of his trauma, when his immediate actions, his overwhelming power, could establish the exact same tension? The audience is going to feel the drag of an origin story being told while the universe is supposed to be collapsing around them.
But that drag you're perceiving is, I think, the necessary weight you need to ground the multiversal stakes. It ensures the emotional impact is proportional to the cosmic scope. And this brings us right to how these high-stakes subplots are supposed to function within this massive runtime.
Exactly. So if Doom's personal stakes need this deep dive into his past, do we really think that the same structural logic justifies adding a whole new conflict, like this rumored extensive scene between Namor and Sue Storm? I mean, bringing in this very specific comic storyline where Namor is in love with Sue and he's positioned as this manipulative figure who might try to take her, it just feels like completely unnecessary baggage for a film that's already trying to collapse the multiverse. I find that insufficient. This subplot is a perfect example of what structurally risks overstuffed complexity and bad pacing. Even with all that extra time, the focus shifts from the world-ending threat to a cosmic domestic dispute.
I would frame its function very differently. These character-focused conflicts are absolutely critical for giving us high-stakes emotional grounding. The rumor that the Fantastic Four will be split up, Reed and Johnny separate from Ben and Sue, that split seems specifically designed to facilitate this extended scene with Namor. This isn't baggage, it's a deliberate narrative choice meant to raise intensely personal, family-level stakes for Reed Richards. Namor gives you a counterpoint to Reed that Dr. Doom just can't. He's ancient, he's emotional, and his threat to Reed's family is deeply personal. This is what ensures the film isn't just a generic, anonymous battle between huge armies, but a character-driven event where the choices these heroes make have painful, human consequences. A conflict between Reed Richards and Namor over Sue Storm is precisely the kind of character drama that justifies the length and keeps the audience invested in the specifics of the heroes, not just the magnitude of the destruction.
But is it genuine investment? Or is it just a narrative deflection that delays the inevitable? I mean, when you have a film that is supposed to be the culmination of everything, inserting a complicated, millennia-old love triangle, no matter how character-driven it is, that just feels like an editorial failure, a failure of prioritization. You're asking the audience to invest significant emotional capital into a tangential conflict when their main focus should be on defeating Doom and saving all of existence. The very density you need to service both Doom's history and this Namor conflict creates what I'd call conflict fatigue. The audience gets overloaded by all these different emotional demands. You see it as layers of depth. I see it as structural weight that's threatening to just shatter the whole thing.
I think that lack of faith in the writer's ability to weave these threads together brings us back to the multiversal elements. I'd argue that the significant role reportedly given to Haley Atwell playing Captain Carter, maybe as some kind of multiversal entity, is powerful evidence that the long runtime is there to facilitate meaningful integration. It lets the movie explore the complex emotional dynamic between her variant and Steve Rogers, which is a relationship that could really ground the whole cosmic element, It goes far beyond just simple fan service cameos. The time is clearly there to make her story actually matter.
I'm just not convinced that a big role guarantees a meaningful one, especially given the evidence. We already mentioned Captain Carter's quick death in Multiverse of Madness. That was a significant character, a big moment that was structurally completely underserved. It was just there to show how powerful Scarlet Witch was. So if Doomsday is juggling so many powerful characters, and the report suggests Atwell might be playing multiple roles, well, that requires even more detailed integration and screen time just to tell them apart. It's a massive structural demand. And under the pressure of a nearly 4-hour film trying to satisfy 50-plus characters, the risk of superficiality just goes up exponentially. She could be on screen for 45 minutes and still feel functionally disposable because the narrative is just too saturated to give her moments the emotional resonance they need.
I think you're dramatically underestimating the capacity for intentional, structured storytelling in a film of this length. I mean, if they're dedicating this much time, it suggests intentional pacing built around these specific character beats. We have to look at the promise of the times 50 scale. And let's be clear, that's referencing a fight sequence that was already monumental. This shows that the film's ambition is just maximalist spectacle and fan service at the highest possible level, which frankly is the central draw for a finale of this importance. That level of scale requires the full runtime to be executed properly, to give every single character, every cameo, every confrontation its proper moment of weight. The scale is the ultimate justification for the length.
I appreciate the ambition, I really do. But I question the practical success of maximalist spectacle taken to that extreme. Increasing the complexity of a battle by 50 times doesn't guarantee a 50 times increase in satisfaction. It only increases the structural difficulty of editing, of pacing, and, crucially, of visual clarity. The logistical nightmare of mixing thousands of digital assets, choreography, multiple character focus points, it often just leads to visual noise. The inevitable outcome, I fear, is a final product that just feels chaotic or exhausting, not epic. It becomes a 3-hour and 45-minute sensory overload. The difference between a 3-hour film and one that's nearly 4 hours, when it's packed this densely, is often the tipping point between immersion and just audience burnout. Sometimes, structural integrity means having the ability to say no to more characters and more lore.
But the entire premise of the film, as reported, is the historical integration of everything. So if you argue for efficiency by trimming the runtime, what do you suggest they cut? If you cut Doom's backstory, you make the central conflict meaningless because his motivation is generic. If you cut the Namor subplot, you eliminate the personal stakes that ground the Fantastic Four. If you cut Captain Carter's complex role, you diminish the scale of the multiverse. The length isn't an accident, it's a structural necessity, designed to contain the film's promise without having to jettison those crucial character beats.
And yet, to include all of it without some structural compromise requires a level of directorial and editorial precision that is extraordinarily rare. You risk creating a product where the audience leaves having seen everything but retained nothing. The structural necessity of the time can become inversely proportional to the volume of material jammed into it. The film risks becoming too busy, too complicated, and too overloaded to be truly effective emotionally. The complexity itself might become the villain, regardless of how powerful Doom is.
The evidence, I think, points to a film where the architects believe it's structurally prepared to handle its immense scope. The rumored runtime, the dedication to detailed backstories for Doom, the grounding conflict with Namor and Sue, the meaningful integration for figures like Haley Atwell, they're all necessary investments. They're the scaffolding required to deliver the comprehensive historic film they seem to be aiming for. They have to provide the time because the scope demands it.
While the ambition is clear, and it's laudable, the sheer density of narratives required managing Doom's full history, balancing multiple variants, inserting these complex subplots, it all just strongly suggests an extremely high risk of structural failure. Important elements may inevitably get rushed or diluted precisely because the extended runtime just invited more and more content. The narrative gravity needed to hold all of this together might simply exceed the film's limit, and that leads to an exhausting experience, not an epic one.
It is clear we agree on one thing. The film's structural integrity is what will determine if this historic scope is a triumph of integration or, as you fear, a cautionary tale of complexity. The interlocking narratives are the key, and how they pace that 3-hour and 45-minute journey, that'll be the final judge.
Indeed.